Hey, it's Josiah. On today's episode, I am joined by Phil Cozzi. You may know him as one of the co-hosts of Mammonburg, a podcast that we used to do with Jackal and Finch. You may also know him from a few earlier episodes of Fruitless, an episode in 2022 called You Are Not the Chosen One, and also an appearance on the Halloween special on the Patreon in 2023. For those who are unaware, since the end of Mammonburg, Phil has begun the process of going into the clergy and is working toward becoming a priest in the Episcopal Church. It felt a bit appropriate to bring on a to-be priest for a little Christmas-themed episode, and so here we are. On today's episode, we're talking about Alexander Payne's 2023 Christmas film, The Holdovers. But before we get to the episode, I need to say that you can support this show on Patreon. For a mere $3 a month, you get access to all sorts of fun stuff, like at least 2 additional episodes of the show per month, access to the Fruitless Discord, and the occasional deleted scene from a main feed episode. If you're not quite ready to commit to helping the show out financially, consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, and hey, I might read it out at the top of an episode. All right, with all that out of the way, let's get on with the episode. You are listening to Fruitless, a podcast hosted by me, Josiah Sutton. This is episode 53, Blue Christmas, featuring Phil Cozzi, where we discuss The Holdovers.
Know your enemy. They talk about we had to physically restrain ourselves from speaking before this episode because we had so many thoughts about it. But we need to make it content.
Yeah, you can't not monetize it. Oh, I understand that. I feel bad at times about that, where it's my people I haven't talked to in a long time or whatever, and then I'm like, hey, do you want to catch up on a recorded medium so that I can make some money off of it?
It's even funnier because I'm literally just directly funding you every month. I'm just
you're paying to be on this episode. If you think about it,
I'm paying to be on this episode. My earnings from supermarket management wage slavery immediately into it's okay. When I'm ordained, I'm still gonna support the show financially. So just call that my tithe. Just make sure.
Yeah, you're giving money to a poor bartender.
It's my Christian duty to support the content. We need content.
Well, welcome everybody to another exciting episode of Fruitless. We got Phil Cozzi. Hello, Phil.
Hello.
It's been a minute since you've been on. I think you were briefly on that thrown together Halloween special I did last year, and then prior to that, you had a pre-hiatus episode a long time ago, pre-Fruitless hiatus episode. So it's been a minute, but it's been a minute. You've been silently funding the show. You provided the microphone I'm using currently, so that is all greatly appreciated. You're a silent contributor to the show.
So Anglicans are actually, as my priest likes to remind me, great benefactors of the arts, and always really have been. So, when the arts agree with us, obviously, and anyone else was put to death if it was.
Okay, well, people who don't know you, why don't you introduce yourself real quick? Because I do think there's a good chunk of listeners that are not from the Mammonburg days.
The Mammonburg days. Well, I've changed a lot of things about my personality and my life have actually really changed in the last few years. So even people who are listening from the Mammonburg days will kind of be like, oh God, he's not screaming for 20 minutes straight and making Jackal laugh until he pisses himself. But I'm just going to make you laugh until you piss yourself. Basically, my name is Phil Cozzi. I am an anthropology major, which is basically just saying I hate money But I'm still in college. I'm soon to actually be transitioning from college to graduate school, specifically seminary in the Episcopal Church. So I will be an ordained Episcopal priest. Not anytime soon. In 3 years.
4 years, yeah.
It takes quite a while. I'm glad it takes quite a while because I feel like some churches will just ordain anybody for the first 20 minutes and be like, see how it goes.
Yeah, no, you have to go through the whole discernment process with the Episcopal Church,
which is great. It's actually fantastic. It's fantastic, but to speak of my experiences a little bit, it's also horrible, specifically as a person who has a little bit of an anxious mind, because there will be several month-long periods where stuff just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And if your brain works very similarly to mine, so when things don't happen for a few months, you're basically like, well, it's just never going to happen. There's nothing building in the background your mind is like, oh, well, nothing's happening. And it's like, well, no, a lot of things are happening. You just don't see them.
Yeah, and it's slow. It's, these old church, the kind of high church traditions have kind of a slow energy to them, which, is kind of different than the breakneck pace of the evangelical world. But yeah, so you're becoming a priest. And then, for those who didn't follow Mammonburg, I used to do a show called Mammonburg, and Phil was a co-host on that along with Finch and Jackal. Jackal's been on here a number of times, so you all know Jackal. But and so to celebrate the holiday season, I wanted to at least get one Christmas movie in this month to talk about. And so Phil and I landed on The Holdovers, which I had not seen. And this would be was this your second viewing of it then?
This was my second viewing of it.
Came out last year. There was a lot of hype around it. Alexander Payne is back, and he's got a Christmas drama, and everyone loved it. And I kept going, I'll get around to it. And this is the beauty of this podcast it forces me to get around to things that I'm always saying I'm going to get around to. And I really liked it. How do you feel about it?
I feel very positive. I have sort of have a theory about Christmas movies that we'll get back onto, what makes a successful Christmas movie, especially in a religious context, because it's Christmas, baby. It's going to have subtle religious themes. Oh no.
Yeah.
Payne has been very sort of clear that, this is just coincidentally a Christmas movie. And I'm like, nah, son, you put in the good religious themes. You did that. I don't know if you did it on purpose, but you did a good job. And he's just salty about it, which is really funny. And I've seen a lot of Payne films. I've seen Nebraska. That was, it's a very good movie about Midwestern culture. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
I've not seen it, no.
But the sort of ethos of the movie is that it's about a guy who wins. He basically wins one of those fraudulent schemes where nowadays they're ubiquitous, where it's like, oh, you've won this big jackpot, come here blank and get your prize. Really, it's just trying to get your private information. So his son, who is, I believe, is played by Will Forte of that show where he's the last man on earth or something like that.
Oh,
and also all of those amazing Tim and Eric bits where he's abused by his father. It's a really good movie about sort of that feeling of Midwestern listlessness in really small towns, where it's one person who feels like he never accomplished anything, and to be told to be winning something they didn't even get. This person is very stubborn, and his son, the entire movie, is telling him Dad, you actually didn't win anything. It's a bit. It's at the end, spoilers, he just gets a hat out of it that says jackpot winner on it, because he says, oh, I'm gonna buy this truck. It really is about a wanton life, a life unfulfilled. And that's what Payne really specializes in. I think that's sort of also a running theme in his films.
Yeah, the only of his films I've seen is Sideways, and I know that's a theme in that one as well. I remember that.
Yeah, I think there is a returning sort of life unfulfilled, which is funny because I think almost in a way, how do I phrase this? I think it almost works as an anti-Payne film, because I think the argument here, at least the thesis of the film, is that there is a fulfilling way to live life, and you sort of get there by the end, but we'll get to that, because I think that a lot of characters in the movie have an unfulfilled life that becomes fulfilling through certain actions, and that's what makes it a Christmas movie.
Yeah, I could see that. It'll be interesting to get into it. Real quick, I wrote out a short plot synopsis that I'm going to stick at the beginning. We're going to spoil this movie, obviously. I always say that just so no one can be mad at me, but I'm going to read that at the top, so then we don't get caught up in the details, the beat by beat kind of details. So, all right. The Holdovers. In December 1970, a teacher, Paul Hunnam, works at a New England all-male boarding school. He is a hard ass and most people dislike him. Over winter break, he is forced to supervise 5 students left on campus, the Holdovers, including Angus Tully, a student whose mother canceled a family trip to honeymoon with her new husband. Also staying behind is the cafeteria manager, Mary Lamb, whose son Curtis attended Barton before being drafted and dying in Vietnam. 5 other students remain, but after 6 days, one student's wealthy father arrives by helicopter and agrees to take them all on a ski trip with parents' permission. Angus is the only student unable to get a hold of his parents and is thus left behind with Paul and Mary. During an argument, Paul chases Angus around the school halls, only for Angus to accidentally dislocate his shoulder. Paul takes Angus to the hospital, and Angus lies in order to protect Paul from any blame. At a restaurant, Paul and Angus run into the headmaster's assistant, Lydia, working as a waitress over the holidays. Lydia invites them to a Christmas Eve party, which Mary also attends. The night ends in disaster as Mary has an emotional breakdown about the death of her son, and Paul discovers that Lydia, who he was romantically interested in, has a boyfriend. Feeling remorseful for being so hard on Angus, Paul agrees to take him on a field trip to Boston, dropping Mary off in Roxbury to see her pregnant sister. Paul and Angus enjoy Boston together, and at one point, Paul runs into an old classmate who he lies about his career to. He eventually explains to Angus that he was expelled from Harvard for harming a wealthy student, but the old Barton headmaster felt bad for him and gave him the job. Angus and Paul see a movie, only for Paul to discover Angus attempting to sneak away in a taxi to see his father, who is in a psychiatric hospital. Paul lets him visit his father. After returning to the school, Angus, Paul, Mary, and Danny, we'll talk about Danny later, celebrate New Year's Eve together. When classes resume in January, Angus's parents are enraged when they find out that Paul took their son to Boston to see his dad and are going to withdraw him and send him to military academy. So Paul lies and says that it was his idea, leading to Paul being fired and Angus remaining at Barton. After some heartfelt goodbyes, Paul drives away from the school. He takes a sip of some expensive cognac that he stole and then spits it out toward the school. Credits. So that's the Holdovers. That's what happened.
That's the bones of it, baby.
And and it's definitely the bones because I was doing these writing out these synopses with, during horror month, and those were easier to do almost because horror movies have distinct plot beats. This is a character study movie. You know what I mean? So there's not as much these clear plot beats as much as it is spending time with the characters and kind of learning about them. So this very much is the skeleton of the movie.
Oh, very much so.
So I guess maybe we could go by character a bit. I think would probably be the best way to talk about it because it's so character focused. Which character do you want to start with?
I think we should start with, to be honest, Mary, because I feel like she's the one who we sort of lose touch with first. She's the one, her final scene happens relatively late into the movie, but she sort of comes back as a background character just a couple more times, if I'm not mistaken, and then is just sort of the plot has dealt with her and her specific trauma, and then has sort of put her off to the side. And then it focuses on Paul and Angus's relationship for the entire rest of the third half of the movie. That's
the main focus of the movie. But I think the Christmas Eve party is the main focus, where we focus in on Mary. So Mary is like I said, a cafeteria manager whose son died in Vietnam. I think it's also notable with it being 1970 and all. She's the black character, at a wealthy white school. And so there's a lot of weird tensions that are around that. It's never too explicit, but it's there. You know what I mean? There's some racial tension kind of floating around. Oh, and then Danny, the janitor, is also black, excuse me. But, there's kind of some weird class and racial resentment that comes out of the students at random points toward them,
Right. There is sort of hints of that they're too good, because the way Barton is sort of presented is that it's a preparatory school for high class education, essentially for the Ivy Leagues. So if you're going to go off to Princeton or Harvard, Yale, etc., Brown, ultimately your first stop, because most of these children are very rich. The implication is not, especially with the intro with Paul's character and being such a hard ass and being very insistent on academic accomplishment, the sort of implication you get here is that these people have more or less guarantees to get into the Ivy Leagues. It's not meritocratic. They're just rich kids who are going to go to the Ivy Leagues. But Paul is his character is the only one who seems to really care about actually preparing them for like Ivy League education and then just to like buying their way through it.
Yeah, he's actually the meritocrat, which is why he's such a hard ass. But that's also the flip side. Is like Mary, the reason she has the job as cafeteria manager at Barton in the first place was to get her son, Curtis, to be able to go, you know? So she was trying to give her son this like, you know, successful launch into the Ivy Leagues or whatever, especially as, you know, a black family in the 1970s, that's not an easy accomplishment. And so this is like what she's trying to do is like set her son up for success, and, you know, and then he dies immediately afterwards. So that's part of the like haunting kind of grief over everything, is the whole reason she even has the job she's working right now was for her son that died. Her
son's memorial, and I'm not to overstate the importance of Episcopalians. I do believe, if I'm not mistaken, that the scene at the beginning is an Episcopal service where it's towards the beginning of the movie. It's the priest at the essentially doing the memorial, also doing like the final service. I guess Barton is to some degree, even though like an interreligious school, they have sort of in the way of like old-fashioned preparatory schools, they have sort of like an interfaith like service that is performed specifically by like, I assume, an Episcopal priest, but because of his vestments, but it's sort of hard to tell. And I think it's hard to tell on purpose.
Yeah, it feels, I mean, well, it's New England too, so it does feel like vaguely high church, Anglo-Prot, yeah.
So it's just sort of like at the beginning of the movie, you have the acknowledgement of her son's death. And you don't really get a lot of context as to his life until later. I mean, I think the implication is that he graduates from Barton and is immediately drafted.
Yeah, actually, it does briefly touch on explaining it. I did catch that, where they didn't have the money though for the college, and so they had the money to get through the prep school, but weren't able to get into college. And he was like, okay, well, you know, maybe this is a win-win. I'm getting drafted, so I can go to college on the GI Bill when I get back. That was kind of like the game plan,
right? So the idea is just that had he survived, things might have worked out, but the fact that he died cut their plans short. Specifically his plans. And I believe there is a point also early on in the movie where he, like, you see his room, you see like their apartment. It's very sort of like, it's very humble. Mary is the only character aside from Angus, who I feel like sort of oscillates between a lot of different states due to his like sort of youth. She is the one who is you could tell that she's religious. I mean, she wears a cross very over, like, and that is like
right. That's one of the little like tensions and foils between her and Paul, because Paul's pretty adamantly atheist.
Oh yeah, his religion is Marcus Aurelius, and we'll get back to Marcus Aurelius, but you know, no pesky gods in this one, and I'm like, oh god, no, he's responsible for the resurgence of Stoicism. Run, everybody. But basically, Mary's character to me, especially in the way that she unfolds throughout, she's a very strong religious woman who is overtly dedicated to making other people feel welcome. You can see that there are some instances where you see her at her job, and you could tell that she is dealing with grief, and that the other cafeteria workers remember a time where she was more lively. Yeah. I think even the janitor sort of alludes to it when he asks her to like dance, and like there's sort of like he's jovial and very fun, and I think there's sort of a sense of romance between the two of them.
There's like a romance that's starting to develop and then gets cut short, kind of, and maybe could still happen, but it seems like it's like not, she's just in too deep of a grief for it to really happen right now.
Right. And I think that's sort of something they repeatedly touch on, is that like Danny, they've had a connection prior, or they still have a connection. It's very not clear. I think it's sort of in media res, is that it's just sort of like a relationship, because the movie is so character focused that relationships don't start and stop in the confines of the movie. They sort of, they have pretext. They have a sort of, we are getting a very small sliver of these people's lives. And this is obviously, you know, one of the first things when I was back in the day when I was a film student, what I was told is that you want to display the most interesting and character defining moments in a person's life.
Yeah.
But this is like, if you're imagining a character, this should be the most important thing that ever happens to them. That's why it's in a movie. So what we see is sort of like the events that make them all go off in different directions for various reasons, which I think is very important at the end of the film.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, this is kind of a notable moment for Mary, because this is where she reorients herself. Because throughout it, we get like, yeah, she has the emotional breakdown, just at the party, and this is the moment where we see a little bit of like the romantic tension with Danny, because Danny's trying to kind of flirt with her at the party. Like, I really love the party and how it's done, because there's this coupling that starts happening with all three characters, and then 2 out of 3 of them end in disaster. You know what I mean? So like,
I know what you mean.
Yeah. Like with Paul, it's, he's like flirting with Lydia. He's like, oh, maybe something's happening. And we also learn that him coming in the first place is him overcoming some anxieties, which we'll get back to. But then when it comes to Mary, she's, having this moment, and then she's putting on some music and dancing or whatever. And what she does is throw on one of Curtis's favorite songs.
And that's what brings out her trauma, is getting very drunk and also remembering their lives together at the song.
Yeah. And I really like that scene, because she's playing the music, and then like all these younger people at the party are like, can you put on something like newer, more hip or whatever? Because she's putting on these like, kind of old 40s sounding songs. I don't remember the artist, and suddenly she just gets really angry, like snaps in a way you don't see her do very much in the movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like, no, like, don't turn this off. And you suddenly get, oh, this is more emotional than, it's not just a random song choice or a nice feeling. Like, she's working through something by listening to this. And so, that also means though that like kind of the romantic moment with Danny kind of falls apart, because she's just not in a place to be able to do this right now, And
I think it's beautiful to me, because she is portrayed very much throughout the movie in the way that I would see like a very fundamentally beautiful Christian woman is sort of portrayed. She has patience for people that other people don't. I love one of my favorite shots in the movie, like one of my favorite short scenes, is that I think Angus sneaks off to the church in the middle of the night, and there's an implication of praying together. Like, he just sort of sits in the pews, and I can't remember if Mary is already there or comes to be there, but they stay together for a period of time, and then it cuts to the next morning.
Yeah.
And I think that unspoken beauty of their relation, like her breakdown at the party, is something that does not fit with the rest of her character, which is why it's so important. That it's her moment of breaking, that she's been holding this in for so long, and she is able to do that for other people, that it sort of breaks her in a way that she's not used to showing overtly. And I think it culminates in her final scene in the movie, really her final scene of prominence, where she they drop her off with her sister. And that's probably one of my favorite sequences in the film as well, where she goes to see her sister, and it's very quiet and very understated. And she sort of climbs these like rickety stairs, these horrible icy stairs that lead up to her sister's house. And she brings Curtis's baby clothes, stuff he wore when he was a child, and gives it to her sister. And there's this, it's beautiful. It's like there's this understated moment of silence between the two of them, where there is like both jubilation and crying and emotion, and they look at each other. It's like the implication that, Curtis, in a sense, will live on through her love for her niece or nephew, like this idea that they will that their family will persist in a very like beautiful and understated way. Like, it's very hard to describe. I think it's just one of those things that you have to see for yourself, where you see her arc over the course of the movie, and then culminating in that is just very emotionally important.
Yeah. There's the brief also mention that the kid, the middle name for the kid is going to, her sister's child is going to be Curtis too, and is notable. Yeah.
And it's very sweet. And that's sort of where Mary is left off in the course of the film, is that she culminates in this moment where her trauma is realized by another person about to, I would say, like, sort of start the same risk, to go through that same cycle of, you know, being a mother, being a parent, and her life sort of extending and changing from that, and her realization that it's not over for herself. Like, Mary realizes it's not over, that things are still going to keep happening, and that there are people that she's going to be there for. And I think that's sort of, in a way, not, I wouldn't say the resolution of her trauma, but it definitely takes a very large burden off of her.
I also think her arc is important because I really like the way that the movie deals with current events, current to when the movie's taking place events, as being something that lingers in the background without being like the forefront or the focus, you know what I mean? And so I think specifically having her son die in Vietnam, I think is an important detail, because the whole movie is dealing with a lot of class in it, you know, in like really muted ways. And I really like that. And what it is that, like, right now in 1970 with the draft going on, you know that all of these kids in this school have the potential to go off and die in the next couple years, but that most of them aren't going to die because they have enough money to go to college.
Right.
You know, and so, like, that's, I think, an important detail throughout the whole thing is, like, you know, yeah, like, her son dies only because he comes from a family that doesn't have the money to send him immediately to college after high school's over. And it's just this background of death that's hanging over everything in the school. Like, the movie has, like, a really good sadness to it constantly that I think it would be really tempting with the kind of movie this is to make it overly sentimental, you know, just make it all like resolve in a nice, comfy way. And instead it lets you linger with just the discomfort of like death and trauma kind of just happening in the background constantly, you know?
And I think, you know what, I know obviously, Josiah, you love to talk about music. And I also, I'm a music enjoyer myself.
Yeah.
There's a song in the movie that I sometimes listen to, which is very melancholic. It's one of the first songs to play. It's Silver Joy by Damien Jurado.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's the newest song. It's the newest song in the film. It came out in 2014. So it is a non-diegetic song. So it's not a song that exists in the world of the Holdovers.
Yeah.
It's sort of like a song being imposed over and I think it really sets the tone for Angus's and Paul's characters. That's their song that like sort of begins the movie, because I think it helps you understand, you know, it's very sort of like melancholic, very... Its name is Silver Joy, which I think sort of is a song about something, like it's sort of that understated melancholic feeling that can be both joyful and sorrowful in equal parts, that it's hard to describe.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think that song playing so early in the film sort of sets the tone in many ways, that it's a song I really enjoy. And like half of the soundtrack is diegetic Christmas music, which is like old diegetic Christmas music, which I think is a very interesting contrast.
Yeah, I think, because, most of it is Christmas songs, except I think it's Damien Jurado songs are the ones that tend to break it up mostly.
Right.
With the newer stuff. And yeah, I mean, just to say, I really like Damien Jurado. If you haven't listened to him before, Caught in the Trees is a really great record. But so I think it adds a good tonal thing to it. I really liked the kind of muted sadness to this movie, I think, because I think it's more reflective of how I feel around the holidays. I tend to vibe with the people having a bad time in the holidays kind of media. Like, you know, even It's a Wonderful Life, which is, you know, often remembered as a warm and fuzzy sentimental movie, has a lot of fucking dying and being in having a bad time.
Oh yeah.
Like, people don't remember that. It was too depressing when it came out. It failed in theaters because it was such a fucking bummer.
So I have abandoned obsessive impressions as a part of becoming a man of the cloth, but I'm gonna do one now because I allowed myself one, and I just like every time It's a Wonderful Life comes up, which is a movie I adore, and you got me really to appreciate it because now I watch it with Nalima every Christmas. It's just sort of my 4K Blu-ray copy is like staring at me from the shelf, watch me. But the podcast, it's in your house, Josiah. The podcast, it's in your house. I love his performance in that moment. It's
so good.
He just like Jimmy Stewart has like a sound to his voice. This is a complete tangent, but like there's just like that and that one Simpsons gag where like everybody's in the bank and like they're trying to withdraw their money because Bart's going around like whispering in everybody's ears that the bank ran out of money, and he's like, and it's in your house. Don't worry. Come on, folks. It's in your house. And then they like start beating each other up because they genuinely believe the money is in each other's houses.
Yeah. That's a good
and then
bit.
They start like beating on him. It's such a good bit, but I digress. That It's a Wonderful Life. We were going to do a comparative episode, but like you said, I think that would have been insane because It's a Wonderful Life is just so dense. It's a very long movie. People forget sort of how long that it is for the time it came out.
Yeah, I would want to spend more time in research. I mean, because it's the movie I've seen the most times, and I literally did an internship at the Donna Reed Museum, so like I kind of didn't want it to just be like a thing we're comparing to a new movie, you know?
Right.
I would want to do a larger thing, like even a video essay or something on it if I was going to do it. But
so I think I want to. This is probably the point in the podcast where when we go on to discussing the other two characters, is I kind of want to set my tone for like a good Christmas movie, what it really means.
Okay, sure, yeah.
So, as everybody knows, priests love to be verbose and very sort of, especially Episcopal priests, love to really break things down into like, and we're like an unabashedly Augustinian tradition. People sort of assume we're not, but it's a very common positionality in the Episcopal Church amongst priests. And what I really find in Christmas movies, what I find most compelling is their portrayal of human brokenness. And this is something you can even find in, frickin' Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer.
Right.
I mean, a lot of like Christmas movies are about the fundamental brokenness of people and how the holidays, specifically, obviously, if we're taking a religious angle, the presence of Christ amongst us changes people in fundamental ways that allows us to overcome our fundamental brokenness and come together in love and companionship during the holidays. And I think that's what a good Christmas movie is ultimately about. Because I think the worst Christmas movies are those like overly saccharine Hallmark movies where everything is sort of perfect from the get-go and everything just needs to get into place. Everything is like disparate, like, it's like big city girl goes to small town. The small town is perfect and has no problems. The man she falls in love with is perfect and has no problems. Her only problem is that she's struggling to figure out how to love him and break up with her city boyfriend who doesn't appreciate small town life. Like everything is perfect in those movies. Even like the city has a little bit of tarnish to it, but the way they portray them is that like these people work in offices that are like the glitziest, most glamorous offices in Chicago or whatever. And they're like, anybody would kill to work there. She's just like sad a little bit sad. It's like, oh, I want to go home for the holidays. I don't want to work so much. It's kind of sucky. Yeah. But like, it's not true brokenness. It's like, it's just a plot device that allows us to get to the point where it's like, okay, now we need the Christmas spirit, which will happen at this exact moment in the film when she realizes, darn, I really just want to return to small town life. It's bullshit, absolute bullshit, derivative bullshit. But the way that I sort of relate to Christmas movies is that, and I've softened on this over time because I used to, the past few years, I would go on tangents where it's like, God, I hate secular Christmas. I think it just misses the point exactly. But in rewatching like a lot of Christmas movies with the idea that I'm becoming like a priest in the background of them, the thing about becoming a priest is that it fundamentally changes your mindset in that like as cynical and as like sort of like hardened my heart can sometimes be. I would not not call myself a very cynical person, but I just think the reality that we live in, it sort of necessitates some sort of reflexive cynicism that I think a lot of people have just sort of built into their hearts at this point, regardless of your personality. I think there is just a lot of reflexive cynicism in the world just because of how things are and how they're becoming, shaping up to be.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, it's watching these Christmas movies, the way that a successful one is constructed is that the figure of Santa Claus, the figures of like people in the movie who exhibit like saint-like qualities are obviously, you know, as Anglicans, we put a great deal of emphasis on the saints, and they're really supposed to be reflections of Jesus, imperfect reflections of Jesus. But reflections of Jesus. And I think that in a way, The Holdovers is a very honest movie about actually trying to do that, because the movie is about people trying to do good against their better natures, against their worst natures, probably. There's a lot of things Paul in the movie and Angus could do, and there's a lot of struggles that they're going through that through love, like through genuine care for each other, people put aside and sacrifice in order to come together. And I think that's what makes it a Christmas movie.
Yeah, I think you're right there. That's good. And I kind of like that, like what you're saying about seeing the sainthood kind of stuff in the Christmas spirit stuff, because I think what makes The Holdovers better to me than a lot of Christmas movies too is that it's not that there's any individual out of the three of them that is the saint figure that represents the Christmas spirit. They all are kind of miserable, and they all have glimmers of saint-like moments.
Exactly. And I think that's
all of them
honest.
have moments where they, you know, where they overcome their selfishness or their grief or their pain and do something on behalf of the other person. And I think that's true. But I think that's a good framing device, because I was going to say, like, when I think of a movie like Miracle on 34th Street or whatever, yeah, like Santa is like a saint in that movie in a lot of ways. You know what I mean? Like he is supposed to be this like force that comes in and makes things better in a broken setting or whatever. Or yeah, I mean, you could even arguably say like a movie like Elf or whatever has an aspect of that, you know. Will Ferrell being like a goofy holy fool.
And I think that would be the parallel that I draw between It's a Wonderful Life and the characters in Holdovers, if we're going to make that comparison, is that George Bailey is the portrait of a saint who does not want to be one. He is the person who constantly is doing other things for other people against his innermost desires, his innermost drives and pulls, just sort of like impulsive aspects of his personality, things he believes very truly that he wants to do in freedom, his idea of freedom. I want to go off and see the world. I want to leave this all behind. And I think that's sort of a universal impulse for people, especially young people. You know, I want to see it all. I want to do all these things. I screw anybody who tells me otherwise. And George Bailey's life is sort of a saintly one in that he never gets to experience that, and he grows bitter about it over time. But he still does it. He still does it, and like the entire impetus of that movie is learning how much that changed the lives of everybody else who lived alongside him, who very much like their lives would not be the same without his presence.
Yeah, and I mean, that's definitely the case with Holdovers. I mean, it's not as big scale, but these are definitive moments in each of the individuals' lives. In particular, the relationship between Paul and Angus. Do you want to do Paul or Angus next?
You know what? I think we should do Angus next, only because I think Paul is, if there is a sort of central, like obviously Angus is to some degree the main character, but Paul is also the main character.
Yeah, Paul's the mainest of characters, I think.
I think he's the mainest.
Because Angus, characters. You're not fully sure he's going to be a main character until all the other kids get sent off.
Right.
And then because I was like, okay, this is gonna be a movie about these like 6 kids or whatever, but no, it's about just him.
And I think we're privy to the most detail about his life, like most specific detail about his life.
Yeah. So Angus, my boy Angus has been fucked over this Christmas real bad. I mean, he's not having a good time. So, okay, do you gather, could you place Angus on like a class level very easily? Because I kind of gathered that the only reason he's at this rich school is because of the stepdad and that he's not from a super rich background, but I might be misreading that.
So the way that I sort of relate to Angus, especially in my memory of like watching the movie for the first time, is that Angus is relatable to me because he does not seem to imbibe the characterizations. And you can see this in the conversation he has with like other kids.
Yeah.
There is a certain level of insulation that all of the other children have from like the horrors of the world, like from like specific things about the world that sort of like drag them down in certain ways. Like when the Mormon kid, I believe when they're like piss their pants in like the middle of the night, and like he's very practical and pragmatic in ways that rich people are not necessarily known to be.
Yeah, no, I think I don't think it's the Mormon kid who pisses his pants. It's it's Park, the Korean kid. And he's sad. That character makes me sad because I kind of wish we had more time with him. Because he's
really far from home, like exceptionally far.
He's the like one of the only kids here that's not a wealthy white kid. He's far from home. He's feels really lonely, and everyone treats him like shit.
And a lot of it is that that's where, to be honest, they're judging their racial politics. Like you can get a good idea about like who is rich and has power relative to everybody else by just how they treat him alone.
Yeah, because that's the thing. Because what Angus does, is he Park pisses the bed, and Angus doesn't draw attention to it. He says like he's like they'll crucify you if they find this out, so I'll help you out. I'll help you get rid of the bed sheets and shit. So yeah, I mean you do see like Angus is really embittered, but he's got a lot more empathy to him than the other rich brats. And I think that comes from so I think he's got a more modest background, but his mom divorced his dad after his dad, we learn, had a psychiatric break of some sort, and is put in an institution. And so she divorced him and then marries a rich guy. And so now they've chosen to use the winter break, the holiday break, to do their honeymoon and ditch Angus after making a plan. They originally made a plan that they were going to go, go to St. Kitts, on a family trip. And then instead they ditch him to be a holdover at the boarding school and go and fuck their brains out, I assume. And
it's really
it's so shitty.
It's really and you can see that he really resents his mother more than his stepdad for it, because his stepdad is just sort of the afterthought. This is just the guy.
He's the new guy, whatever.
He's the new guy, whatever. But his mother just becomes this and I've heard that this happens sort of in divorce proceedings. It's that sort of regression to a teenage state. This is it's sort of that reinvigoration, that personal reinvigoration that sees all of your previous responsibilities as afterthoughts once everything sort of comes into place. Because oh, this is my chance at a new life. And it even recalls to me God, it makes me think of Manchester by the Sea. Those scenes where he goes to visit his mother, and she's remarried this very religious, very you can sort of surmise kindly but very sort of evangelical, very rigid, kind of calm person who exists outside of the logic of Manchester. That sort of he is a figure that she takes a lot of comfort in, because basically she thinks, this is how I fixed my life. And there's an appearance of we want you to be part of our life. Yeah, we really could have you be part of our life. But really they couldn't care less, because he's sort of a product of this town and of its culture and of his father. And she would just rather not have anything to do with that. That they're only putting on appearances, that is okay insofar as you're my son, of course I should have a relationship with you. But I hate every individual component of your being. Yeah. And later on in the movie, I think you also get a fear from the mother. I don't know if this is ever really stated. We don't get a lot of time with his parents, but I think there is a fear that Angus certainly has about himself that I think is reflected in his mother, that he will end up exactly like his father.
No, that's he does say that explicitly at one point, and part of it is because there's a a brief moment where we see that he is on some sort of antidepressant, which is a bonding moment with Paul, actually, which kind of can come back to, but because they're both on it. And so he's got some sort of mental illness, and he's afraid that's going to manifest in, becoming like his dad, who, although his dad seems to be more like schizophrenic or something.
Yeah, I was going to say that he's got paranoid delusions.
Yeah,
and we'll get to that.
Oh, no, that's one of the most, we could just go straight to, that's one of the most heartbreaking scenes in the movie is, of course, when Angus sneaks off to see his dad and, gets to have his moment of like, I just thought you'd want to visit me in the holidays, and his dad's staring blankly at him and then is like, I need to tell you something. And you think it's going to be this like emotional, like, something revelatory, and then he goes, I think they're putting something in my food.
Yeah, because it is the most. It's a movie that it's a part of the movie where in a stereotypical Christmas movie you would probably get a moment of catharsis, a moment of reconciliation, but it doesn't give you that. It just says like, this is what Angus has to deal with for the rest of his life, and the rest of his father's life is his father being in this state.
Yeah,
and this is just something he has to deal with, and it's not going to be resolved clean or easy.
No, this is what I appreciate about the movie is I think that it doesn't take a lot of these like easy ways out that are really, really easy to do in a Christmas movie.
And I think there is an understated, and this might be me over, analyzing Angus as a person. There is an understated feeling of quiet sort of like faith, sort of like in a transitory period in his life, especially in his interactions with Mary. Like he does not take wholly seriously the patterings of like, Paul, who is very Marcus Aurelius brained and very, very, very like aggressively atheistic and very secular, is that there are quiet moments where Angus, that one quiet moment specifically, where he sneaks off and is with Mary in the church, which I think is very important. I think there is a small, quiet spark of hope in his character that literally just doesn't exist for Paul.
Yeah, I see that. Like, I think it'd be too far to call him a religious character. I don't think he's religious at all. It doesn't seem like or at least I'd call him agnostic, if anything. He's indifferent to that.
I'd say, but
he does seem to have, a spirituality on some level that is kind of comes out in vague points. He's more than anything a longing, I think. And I think that is, manifested in something that resembles faith. I don't know.
I think that's a good way to put it, because like they're never, they're still making jabs after the Christmas service about religion to each other, as teenage boys ought to do. They're all sort of like bickering amongst themselves, and Angus even says some things that like sort of allude to the fact that he is sort of oscillates between mild respect and just like, whatever.
Which is like a lot of the kids that are going to be at this boarding school or whatever, right? Is you grow resentful of religion or organized religion if you're forced to go to chapel at a school that you hate being at. Like that doesn't tend to do it any favors, I'd say.
I think so. I mean, I feel like, especially in interactions I've had in my own church, like the most faithful kids are the ones whose parents just sort of like let them come and go as they please. Like, hey, we should go to church together. And they'll say yes most of the time, but when they're not feeling it, they're not there, which I think is healthy.
Yeah, I think so. When you're forced to it, you don't tend to.
Yeah, when it's compulsory, it just like, it could, because I've seen some kids who are there every Sunday who are like very religious, whose parents are like very normal and very nice. And it's like, yeah, I mean, I have to be here, but I also really like being here. So
yeah, like, some people are like that. Yeah.
Some people are like that. It depends on the person. But Angus is sort of, he's a very complicated character because he's in that, to borrow anthropological definitions, he is in a liminal state between childhood and adulthood. And basically this movie, I don't think necessarily serves as his definitive rite of passage. He doesn't culminate into he does not come out of it as a fully formed person, which I think is also a problematic thing that movies do, is that you come out of it as a fully formed person.
No, but he's on the path to being able to be a fully formed person, because I don't think he gets to actualize if he goes to military academy.
Right. Which Paul
so that's
notices.
Something I think we hadn't emphasized is, like Barton now is like his third or fourth school he's been at, something like that. He's been kicked out of schools repeatedly. And so they're going to send him to a military academy if he doesn't, and
which is very funny.
Is there is there a death sentence kind of built into him getting sent to military academy? I don't fully know does that mean he will go to Vietnam once he graduates?
Well,
or no?
See, the thing about it to me is that it reminded me of a lot of old media that I grew up with, where military school was synonymous with like breaking you, with taking all of the good parts of your personality, not necessarily with I know the backdrop of Vietnam adds like a specific level to it as well, that it adds a threat of like, if you go into the military, like you might be sent to die. But I think military school in the media I always grew up with as a child represents like a harsh repression of freedom in order to get like desired organized results from a person, like to make them become a person where they leave all of their like most interesting traits behind and become like a machined, very like factorial being that is like, I act in specific ways and do specific things, and all of my ideas of sort of like freedom or like, you know, self actuality. It always, to me, represented like, we're just going to hammer you down until you fit like a very specific mold and stop causing trouble. It never addresses what the actual trouble. It addresses an idea of like their problem. And the solution is a flat solution for everybody, which is we just need to mold you into. Yeah, you just need more discipline.
And I think that's and I mean that's part of it, is because I think Paul toward the end of the movie starts to really realize the extent to which Angus is a naturally smart kid that has repeatedly have life put him in situations where he's not able to be academically successful or whatever. That it's much more the result of, how he's been treated, how he's been what's happened in his life that's prevented him from being able to take off academically. But he is a smart kid, and there is this like cycle that's happening with him where the notion is, well, he just needs more discipline, and that makes him do worse, and then he needs more discipline, and it's just getting him beaten down and down and down and giving him like a learned helplessness. Well,
I was wondering if you could almost relate to that in a way, because in a way I could relate to it, not necessarily that it was always discipline for me, but only recently, especially going back to college in my mid-20s and actually like getting an undergraduate degree, I only really felt the capability to be academically successful then. For many, many years, I felt like I just couldn't do it. There was just some mental block, and part of it, I think it was my hyperactivity, my inability to sort of focus for long periods of time.
Sure.
Where it was just like, there was always some little part of my personality that just didn't want to do school on school's terms growing up. And I always thought I was dumb for it. And then only recently, and this isn't, I promise you this isn't gloating, but it's like back when I went back to community college and I started getting basically all A's. And I was like, oh, this is weird. Now something should go wrong now, because I'm not doing this perfect. I'm not spending all of my time studying. Maybe I'm not even like doing half the readings because I'm so busy. I have a job and I keep getting A's, and things keep spiraling into like, oh no, oh God, like even now I'm set to like end this semester with straight A's if all of my finals go fine, which I think they will. And I'm just like, it keeps happening where my previous self-conception is like, oh no, you should be a failure. These should blow up in your face. And it keeps not happening. And I'm like, oh dear God, does that mean what I think it means? Like, oh my God, it might mean that I have some academic capability that I wasn't aware of for many, many years, and for some reason it decides to function now.
There's ways I relate and ways I don't with the character, I guess, because I think I didn't struggle with as much the worry that I wasn't able to succeed academically, because like I've always felt like smart enough to do that or whatever, but it was consistently life circumstances kept pushing me into situations. So that's the aspect of it I relate to, is that life shit keeps happening, where it's like you grow resentful because it's like, I could be a normal fucking college student with good degree, good grades or whatever, but I went through a fucking divorce in college.
Right.
Stuff like that. You know what I mean? Where it's like life just keeps happening to me, and what should be a 4-year college degree becomes a 5-year college degree, and it was like that. It was like the constant feeling of climbing uphill to be able to just get my degree. But I see that. And I guess the sense of feeling beaten down by the world or whatever. And I do relate to this idea that everybody thinks that the problem is you need more discipline, and then you get more discipline and it just makes you worse. And I wonder to what extent like Angus is supposed to be coded a bit as ADD or something. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think you could even see that in evangelicalism, like from what I've studied of it, is that like it's a very disciplinary tradition in like an overt way. Mm-hmm. And its version of formation of faith is feel so guilty that you can't imagine doing anything else. Mm-hmm. You can't imagine another way of relating to God. And I think obviously in both of us there was this heinous video that came out that I disagree with a lot of points, but I can see where the person is coming from, that he is an ex-evangelical, and he's talking about how he almost like, to him it almost seems like Episcopalians don't believe in anything. Like they get up and talk about like, their faith journeys and stuff like that. And this is a problem I have when people like look at the Episcopal Church, like from the outside looking in. It's like, oh, everybody's chill, so that means they don't care, which is also like a very strange thing that like evangelicalism, as how I've studied it for like years, now that I'm finally getting up to speed with how it treats people, is that it makes the non-compulsory, like the compulsory aspects you grow up with, the very disciplinary, like memorize the entire Bible, do this, do that, like do all of these things and you will have a chance at being a functional Christian person. And that sort of like harsh, compulsory, disciplinary, rigid idea of formation that's flat for everybody typically just drives people insane. And when they go and they look at the Episcopal Church, and there are some people who don't stay for coffee hour, some people who do stay for coffee hour, where like everybody comes and does the same things and believes broadly a lot of the same things, most of the same things. But from the outside looking in, it just seems like everybody's doing their own thing. And you're just like, well, this is just less serious than what I grew up with. Like that disciplinary, that one size fits all sort of like, we're going to form you into one specific kind of person.
Yeah.
That never works. It never works. And it's terrible. It's terrible. It doesn't work. And it drives people insane because it habitualizes and like it pathologizes certain things into being like compulsory and not reflective. It's not like you're growing in faith. It's you're doing them because we told you so. And this is the only way to be good at being a Christian.
Yeah. I think that's true. I think, I think the difference between the environment that's kind of laid out, for Angus and then the evangelical one, though, is the evangelical one is all about also, it's not just the discipline or something like that. Because sometimes people aren't even very good at that in the evangelical world. It's the constant distrust of your own thoughts. It's right. Like having a bad thought is itself bad, like, so it's your own thoughts end up in this discipline game, and that's what really starts to fuck with you, especially if you are like Angus and myself, somebody with chronic depression, because you have no control over your emotions. You really, like, I don't have control over how I feel any given day. And if it's, you have a religious tradition that's based entirely around like, well, you need to be like joyful about the Lord 24/7. I mean, that's a really cruel thing to tell a depressed person, because what you're telling them is God doesn't love you.
Well, that's why I love that we are a distinctly Catholic tradition, because I believe it is a Catholic ethos that you can show up to to service and feel like shit. You could show up to mass and feel like shit, and it's not
that's what attracted me to more liturgical traditions, was because, look, I might not believe in God in my heart today, but I can kneel and I can say the fucking words, and maybe I'll believe tomorrow.
There's a sense that the structure of the liturgy is God being there for you when you can't be there for Him.
Yeah,
and I think that's what's beautiful about traditional liturgical traditions, is that they don't really change much, and that's good in some way. Like, not changing the liturgy is good in a lot of ways, where you can just show up 50 years later and know what's going on.
Yeah.
But Angus is that sort of like, he has a mix of emotions that I think in various contexts in his life make him out to be like this id-like figure that he really isn't. That people sort of look at him and they're just like, oh, he's all impulse, and like the moments he gets frustrated, the moments he does something to like break his, dislocate his arm out of like sheer frustration at like the systems he's being put through. Mm-hmm. They characterize him as a figure of id when he really isn't. He's very much reflective.
Yeah, I think so. And like oftentimes his id moments are him lashing out against, being treated unjustly. But you see in those like quiet moments, this like empathy and this reflective side to him, I think. And yeah, like he is someone who would be absolutely crushed by military academy because of this, you can tell. And so that's why, at the very end, Paul intervenes. And I do think it's also notable, like, that he shows thoughtfulness after dislocating his arm, in that initial moment where he lies on behalf of Paul to get him out of trouble. Because they go to the hospital and they know, like, if they put down insurance, then his parents are going to be made aware, and then his parents are going to blame Paul, and Paul could get expelled because he, is responsible for a student getting his arm dislocated. So, because of that, Angus lies and pretends that Paul is his father and that his parents are divorced, which is true, and is like, please don't put down insurance. We can pay cash, because I was just hanging out with my dad and I don't want my mom to know it. And it works, it doesn't get Paul in trouble. So you see that like thoughtfulness is there, even as he's being like, it to Paul's mind, a little shit leading up to it,
It's true. Well, I think there's also this is a good segue into Paul, is that there is a great deal of overlap in between their young selves, that I believe there are some instances where you can see Paul having that like spiteful id, that sort of like, there are moments he does certain things. They're a little bit more quiet and understated with age. He has a terrible relationship with the headmaster, and that's an important detail.
Yeah.
That like the headmaster is basically,
and to be like, entirely clear, the headmaster sucks so
he does
bad.
suck.
So bad.
The headmaster is like, why can't you just be easy on these kids and let them get all A's? Because, like, we're just getting so much fucking money, dude. We're getting so much money.
You got to be nice to the donors' sons. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's very much like, you're actually trying to be a teacher in an institution that's not about teaching. It's not about learning anything. It's about, the cultural and economic preparedness for Ivy League living.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and this is why, maybe we should move to Paul here. This is why Paul is the character I related to in this movie the most, actually. His like, I don't know, Rome-loving atheism is a bit annoying, but like...
I actually find it endearing for some reason.
No, I find it endearing, and I think it comes from a serious resentment. Because think of it this way, right? He is a product of New England, right? And so much of Paul's shit comes from, I don't know if he's actually got a poor background, but, he's definitely not as well off as everyone else, right? He's resentful toward the rich Ivy League environment that he is a product of. And I think his anti-religiousness is a jab at the environment he's in, because he's coming out of these private Ivy League Protestant schools. And so I think his atheism is pushing back against the environment he's in. Because it's important to note it's in the 70s right now. This isn't as nowadays I kind of feel like, oh, Harvard atheist, big whoop. But like, I think it's a little more,
Well, I think you're right, because in his interactions
against the elites,
his interactions with Mary, he never makes her feel bad for being religious.
No, he's just got some resentment, I think.
There is a surface level, there is a sort of commensurate respect that he has for her that he does not have for all of these people who have this sort of compulsory view of religion, which has really changed in the modern day. I think really, like, in the 70s, it's more of like this, you do this because this is what forms you.
Yeah, it's a dislike of civic religion on some level.
You really know what I mean? Annoying civic religion that's like, oh, you do this not necessarily because you believe Christ is present in the Eucharist. You do this because everybody else is doing this, and it gives you a good social standing. Yeah. And there are some, good things to believe in there, and well, what else are you gonna do on Sunday mornings? Which it just doesn't work, and that's what led to like sort of like the Spong era. Like I've talked about this with my priest. It led to the Spong era simply because people were getting really lazy. There was Spong looked at himself, and Spong was very progressive. I shit on Spong a lot, but he was like the first person to relate to like literally to advocate for, LGBT inclusion in the church. He was just coming at it from a place of like being so liberal. He was like, I mean, we might as well just be a progressive institution. And more or less that sheer like laziness is waning in churches today, mostly because Presbyterians have imbibed in it so much that they basically are non-existent, and I think everybody's scared that they're like, no. If we do that, and Anglicans are more complicated than that, because Anglicans always have that sort of like duopoly between like sheer liberal Protestantism and being Catholic. So that Catholic impulse is like, God, even if you don't feel it today, you're gonna believe in the ascension, and by Jove, you're just gonna make it work. And it's like, okay, we can deal with that. That's good. That's probably a good impulse, even though like sometimes it makes us feel like shit. It's probably a good impulse. But that's also sort of more modernist, like the Episcopal Church during the 70s of the Spong era my priest knew like people who would just be like, yeah, we're here for compulsory reasons. And he was just like, what? Because like my priest is a very like sensitive, intelligent, gay Anglo-Catholic who's just like, what the hell are you guys doing?
Yeah.
But he appreciated the input of Spong to be progressive. It's just that sheer laziness of everybody still coming to church, even though they just don't care, made people exceptionally lazy. It made them not really think about it too much. And that really actually is a cultural problem that I think we're still dealing with today. And I think that's the cultural problem in a sense that like Paul's character resents, because he actually does have beliefs. They might be beliefs formed in sort of like in opposition to the norm, but like he really does care about the process of Marcus Aurelius.
So but I think there's a lot more class stuff going on with Paul's whole thing, because his whole thing is he doesn't want to just hand out easy A's to a bunch of elite kids who, are going to be shipped off to Ivy Leagues and have a successful life. He like wants them to actually learn the shit they're doing. And so him even being a hard ass, like it didn't strike me as me hating him initially, even though I think he is too much of a hard ass, like, because I was like, yeah, these little pricks do need to learn. Like, I don't know, like they feel entitled to an education that they're not actually engaging with. And I don't know, maybe it's because I'm the product of not nearly as elite, but a private school as well, that I have a real resentment for the like rich kid that seems to skate by cheating and fucking not doing anything.
No, but I feel that way as well. I mean, I feel that way even now.
You see that even deeper in like when you finally learn his backstory, right? Because it's like, well, why does he not want to just hand out an easy A or an easy C at least to these like donors' kids? It's because when he was at Harvard, he got expelled for the broader story. I kind of did a tightened version of it, smaller version of it in the synopsis, but the broad story is that like he got falsely accused of plagiarism by a donor's son who stole his work and turned it in first. And, he started getting accused. He got accused of plagiarism by this legacy donor's son to Harvard. And so Paul eventually, quote unquote, accidentally hit him with a car.
It's a class dynamic that I think you could see in his living situation. There is a sense that like when he goes back to like, he lives in the sponsored housing of the school. Like he lives in sort of like, it's unclear what it is from the outside looking in, because I don't think we ever get a perspective of the like. And I think the movie is very complicated in that Barton isn't a real place. It's actually cobbled together from a lot of disparate places. That they actually shot the film in many different locations, and like many different locations with similar architecture, and bring it together into like looking like a cohesive school. Yeah. Which is, it lends a great deal of verisimilitude to the way that Barton functions as a school, but sometimes it's a little bit difficult because it's not exactly clear where Paul's character lives. I believe he lives in like some sort of dormitory or some sort of like Like, he is an institutional man.
Yeah.
He is literally just like, he lives, like, even his workout routine, like when he's like getting sloshed, when he's like drinking whiskey or scotch or whatever he's drinking, and he's like laying in bed, and he's like, he talks about like doing the exercises that they have, which is very comical because it's clear that like his body is the product of like some level of alcoholism.
Yeah.
And yet he still does these like, these like Ivy League, like, oh, you get up in the morning and you do these exercises, and it gets the brain, like, he is an institutionalized man. He is somebody who's been formed in opposition to, but also in Ivy League institutions. And that's also what gives him like a certain level of resentment towards these kids, is that like he actually had to try because he was never afforded the privilege of just not caring. So he actually has interests. He actually has an affection, however twisted, for the things he was put through, because he still does them every day. And he resents the children, I think, specifically for the fact that they don't have to care, that they can just sort of sit back. And that's also why he, dukes it out with that one student who still like steals his work in the past, is that they're allowed to become academics in sheer ignorance or hatred of the things that they're studying. And his desire to I think actually like write a book, like actually have like a formulated thought about like the things he's studying. I think that what we see is a character who does genuinely care about a lot of different things and resents the people who can afford not to care and still be successful.
Yeah, I mean, I think he cares about the institution as an educational institution and is very aware that it's actually mostly a class-based institution, an elite prep school. It's and like, this is, I think, part of why I relate to the character too on some level, even though, again, I was never in nearly as prestigious an environment. I had the situation of like going to a private school after having taken a gap year between high school and college, and then going to a community college. I had all that, and then and getting married young because of my evangelical upbringing. And then I end up living at the private school because I go through a divorce mid-college, right? Mm-hmm. So I've just seen a lot more life than a lot of the students I was around. And I did develop a pretty deep resentment, but especially because I was like, I'm here because I give a shit. Like, I'm here because I want to learn. And a lot of the kids I knew weren't. They were there because their parents are paying for college and they were told they needed to go to college. And I'm like, well, I'm putting myself in a shit ton of debt because I want to learn about history. So why the fuck are you in my historiography course? Why are you here? You don't give a shit. You're going to skate by with C's, which, the professors are just going to hand out because, they don't want to fail you. And I've been working my ass off, and I get this resentment. I also think it's a recipe to make a really miserable person if you hold on to too much of this resentment. But
no, I feel the exact same way. I mean, because my situation is very similar, is that like Rutgers it's a state school, but it's expensive to a certain degree. There's a certain kind of person who gets to go to Rutgers. It has like a 2/3 acceptance rate. It has a minimal level of prestige. And I do go to class with absolute numbskulls that I have seen simply just a lot more life than them.
Yeah.
Just like this being like going back to school when I was 25, especially in community college, and like being able to get good grades and like actually know things. Like, my anthropology professors are like astounded that I know who like David Graeber is and can talk about him with fluency, a certain level of fluency and passion that I think his work is compelling. And one of the teacher's assistants turned to me once and he's like, why do you have like a theoretical why do you know theory despite the fact you're like you're a transfer student from community college? Like, you shouldn't, know more than the average person coming into like anthropology as a discipline knows at this age. And I was like, well, I mean, I just had an interest in sociology and, just due to like my circles of friends, came in to like read excerpts of things and sort of get a baseline understanding of this stuff from here and there and et cetera, et cetera. And it's surprising because being an older student coming in with like foreknowledge of like the fields I'm studying, you know, especially when I announce like, hey, I'm becoming a priest. I'm like a 27-year-old man who works as a grocery store manager at night. People are like stunned. They're like, you're married? Mm-hmm. You're doing like, it's, and I have a resentment, a little bit of resentment. I would be dishonest if I told myself that I didn't. Because I can see these kids just sort of like relaxing, you know, staring blankly at their computer and like shopping for like exercise pants in the middle of a lecture I actually find interesting.
Yeah.
And, like, this is just being wasted on you. And I can't hate you enough for that for some reason. There's just like, it's like those people who... It's like those people who get to take communion, but they don't believe in like the presence of Christ in the Eucharist. Like, I'm a gracious person, but there is a reflexive little part of me that's just like, oh, this is just lost on you. Like, you just don't care. And it's just that I think sometimes is a very negative impulse, but I think it's also a very honest impulse that it's like, why, like, you just wonder in somebody who's burdened with caring about certain things, why some people arrive at these institutions and just think they're too good to actually engage, and they can just skate by and they can have a normal, fulfilling life.
Yeah, I think it's the tension between college as an educational institution and one as a class marker. And even in like the more non-prestigious schools, it's that way in the sense of like that's what the function of a college degree is for most people, is like it's supposed to get you a job, which, you know, as a bartender with a BA doesn't always. But, you know, like that's how it's seen. And so that tension is frustrating when you're somebody who is actually interested in the educational stuff. So this is why I get Paul's like weird relationship with Barton, because he also loves it because he loves education and he loves learning and teaching. But, you know, he also hates what the school is as this like, you know, class institution that's just designed to make, you know, either successful elites or in more like a public college setting, it would be to make workers, office workers, you know, stuff like that.
Right, to form people into like the professional managerial classes college institutions often do. It's just sort of like, here's your ticket to ride, buddy. You're going to get a job that you hate, but you're going to be economically fine. And then that's where movies like American Beauty, the impetus of which they come from, is this generation of people growing up in these institutions. And I don't even think that it's the best portrayal of that. It's just something to invoke, is that it's just like, oh God, it's that sort of like listless, you know, 90s realization that now you're middle-aged and you actually never accomplished anything or never cared.
It's the like that end of history Fight Club kind of vibe, of the like, that's the going through the college and getting the good job or whatever. See, that's a fundamental difference between those 90s movies and now, is that like I don't have the option of the listless but middle class job, right? You know what I mean? Like I got the college degree and now I'm, you know, bartending, or I was working a shitty office job that pays the same amount as bartending prior to this, you know, like.
And there's also an element that, like, you know, more often than not nowadays, you would end up like Paul Giamatti if you went into like the field now, and that like you kind of get a sense that like he's stranded there, but also that he's not being paid particularly well because he doesn't have the actual credentials to be there. It's like a job he's grandfathered into. Right. So there is an element of like, oh, he's being allowed to teach here because he's very well versed on the topic, and due to a little bit of like, I wouldn't say nepotism, but a little bit of like, you know, a little bit of nepotism, a little bit of like, he can sort of finagle a relationship with people based off of, you know, presupposed relationships. And that allows him to like function at the institution on a base level and actually get paid for his work. But I don't get the sense that he's being paid particularly well, because he can't live off campus. He has no life outside of the school. Right.
I think the pay is predominantly that he's got room and board. And so he, you know, takes advantage of that because then he doesn't have to pay rent. So he can just live on the school. But yeah, I think he's a really interesting character. I also really love because the ending is him he sacrifices himself by getting himself fired in order to keep Angus from going to military academy, but also he liberates himself by doing that. Like, I think that's the market growth, is that he finally leaves this institution that he actually loathes. What he likes is the academic shit. And that's also what's important about, there's this constant reference of how he wants to write a monograph reference throughout, wants to write a book, but not quite a book, a monograph. In the final, one of the final scenes, Mary brings him an empty notebook and says that this is what you're going to write your monograph in. So the implication being like, actually, this elite institution is impossible to have like the genuine life of the mind to take place here. So you're going to go off and actually try to do that now. Like, you're going to try to do this away from the institution. And yeah, I really like the final scene because it's two things at once, right? Where he takes he steals that expensive cognac from the school, right?
Which was like awarded to the headmaster for something. I don't remember what.
So it's a good, like, fuck you to the headmaster, right? But it also speaks to a moment because he takes the sip of it and we see him drinking so much in this movie. So like him just taking a quick sip of like liquor or whatever is not shocking. But what is shocking is instead of it, what he does is he spits it out toward the university or toward the boarding school. And so I like that because there's two things going on at once. It's a fuck you to the university. And also it's the implication he didn't keep it in his mouth. Like maybe he's about to switch on his alcoholism. It's a subtle sign to me that he's not, he might be trying to cool it on the drinking at least. There's some character growth happening there.
And I think that's what makes this movie a Christmas movie, is that there is a level to which the characters grow in ways that is sparked on through the holidays. Like the holidays, I feel like have that effect that, even still do have that effect on people, where as cynical as we are today and how like sort of the erosion of like the previous norms of these things have sort of occurred and are still happening, I still think people do want to. There is an element of the holidays that still has it, like, works in people, especially like, through Christ, I would hope.
Yeah.
But like Paul Giamatti's character, I what I find so compelling about him is that he is willing to finally let go. And what he does is he submits, which I think he simultaneously submits, but through submission, he's liberated. He submits to like what I believe the headmaster has been trying to do for years. And you get the sense over the course of this movie that the headmaster has been trying to fire him, finding an excuse to fire him for a really long time.
Yeah.
And I think through submission, because, bringing up my own pal, Barth here, amazing Barth. Basically, he argues that like true freedom is submission to the will of God, and that what we believe is freedom, that impetus to just go and do whatever you want, like that sort of quintessentially American virtue of quote unquote freedom, having no obligations to anyone or anything, isn't true freedom. Essentially, turning yourself over to the will of God is what freedom is. And it would be a stretch to say that Paul's character turns himself over to the will of God, but he does submit to things that are outside of his control and is liberated through it, because he's allowed to sort of go out into the world now, even though he will struggle in much the same way he struggled when he was young. The malaise that was placed upon him through operating this way for so many years is being lifted somewhat. And I think it's lifted through his relationship with Angus, because he sees so much commonality between the two of them.
Well, and one aspect of the movie we haven't mentioned yet, but it's actually the thing I was thinking about most while watching this movie, is that this movie's primary theme to me is loneliness.
I think it really is about loneliness.
Because all three of the characters are like lonely in their own ways, in unique ways. With Paul, it's out of resentment toward the world and kind of an inward focus, developing this kind of walls against people. And, with Angus, it's being beaten into submission by the world. And so you kind of turn off from others. And, with Mary, it's losing a child, and losing family. And throughout the holiday period, there is a kind of three lonely people kind of coming together and breaking down that loneliness. So, and that's what I think I found ultimately most moving about this movie, is that this feels like a Christmas movie for people who have a bad time around the holidays.
And I think you're right about that.
Yeah.
Because it's just, the thing about it is, like, so many people do spend the holidays alone. Like, sometimes I'll even see memes on, like, boards where, like, you spend any given time on the internet, stuff sort of just, like, circulates around and sort of finds its way to you, even if you're not, like, in a community that really engages with them.
Mm-hmm.
There's this really good image of, like, it's like a woman playing, like, Xbox on Christmas Eve and be, like, streaming and being like, well, fuckers, it's another year alone at the holidays, I'm not gonna do anything.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people just, like, experience the holidays that way, like, the erosion of, like, familial connection and, like, interpersonal connection through loneliness, I think, is just becoming more relevant than ever. So much so that my church does something called a Blue Christmas, and what it is it's a service based around melancholy at the holidays, where it's like, you go to this service if you do not want to feel compulsorily happy about the holidays.
Yeah.
And I think that's marvelous, just because what I believe is that the Christmas story is a melancholic story.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, like, Jesus being the savior of humankind and being born into a lowly birth of, like, shivering in the cold and being, like, held by his mother in a manger off in the middle of, like, nowhere Palestine is a really, really sad story, if you think about it. Literally running away from murderers and marauders, and just traveling that distance, and, like, the basically the killing of like, all of these disparate elements of his story come together to say that, like, dear God, like, the child that will inevitably save mankind, the incarnation of God on earth, has such a sad and lowly birth of cold and fright and,
Yeah, and it's I think notably it's a glimmer of hope in a hopeless situation too. That's, I think, a thing about Christmas, is it isn't a big explosion of hope and energy in the way Easter is, right? Easter in the Christian tradition is the resurrection, it's the revolution, it's the boom, as, like, Christmas is more like hope is on the way. It's much more like, this is why I think one of the greatest Christmas movies of all time, like I did last year, is Children of Men.
Oh yes.
And even though, again, you could argue whether it's a Christmas movie, but I love that movie. And and I think part of why that's that way is because it's the glimmer of hope. It's not, it would be, that movie could be so cheap if it wanted to be.
Oh, right.
And that's, and it doesn't. It gives you just the amount of hope necessary to really be emotionally impactful without giving you too much that it becomes sentimental.
Well, it's just like, what is Children of Men but the pure raw encapsulation of the modern Christmas story, with miraculous birth, with incarnation, like, all of these elements. It really is just almost a heightened modern version, sort of more relatable to us now, of the Christmas story. And that's probably, drawing broad sweeping comparisons. It is one of my favorite movies, even well and apart from its religious themes. But it's just that loneliness, that isolation, the traveling to Egypt, the birth in Bethlehem, that isolation, I think it is sort of necessary to understanding in any sort of Christmas movie context. Because I think Christmas movies in the modern day, because we've had so much of, like, Christian culture for the last several thousand years, and that sense of togetherness that people have around the holidays, that's a very new invention of sort of corporate Christmas. I mean, you remember a lot, like, if you watch, like, old versions of Scrooge, it's just like, heck, Bob Cratchit's version of Christmas sounds miserable to anybody who is, like, experiencing Christmas in an affluent nation. But that was sort of like, a lot of people went through Christmas that way, like, going around and being like, hey, you want to donate stuff to these, like, workhouses where, like, the conditions are miserable and people don't even know what Christmas is the impetus for creation of that, like, one weird, like, that one Christmas song where it's like, don't they know it's Christmas time at all? Like,
yeah, I fucking hate that song.
I hate that song too. Mostly because it's born out of like that sort of like Africa is one country. Save the children. We gotta save the African children. We gotta feed the world, but like not in like a we should actually address any problems ways. Like we should just dump money into some kind of like loose organization that says they'll do that.
Yeah.
But that horrible impetus of like the 90s where it's just like, let's dump money in meritocratic ways to fix the problem so that people can know that it's Christmas everywhere. And it's like, wait, you don't think people in Africa are celebrating Christmas? Like, maybe in a completely different cultural way, but like they're still celebrating it, dude. And anyway, that is a long, lengthy, horrid diatribe, but it is sort of built out of that sort of uniquely American Christmas where it's just like compulsorily happy. And it's where you get Hallmark movies. And The Holdovers is the anti-Hallmark movie, which is good. Yeah. Hallmark movies are just like a perfect encapsulation of that like sort of willful, intense happiness that is compulsory that everybody should feel. Because, damn it, it's Christmas, and if you can't feel that any other time of the year, you gotta feel it now. And people being like, I don't. And where does that put me?
Last year, I remember hit me really hard on this front because, I felt really, and this year I also feel really out of step with the quote Christmas spirit or whatever. But last year, especially because, the war in Gaza was really, the genocide in Gaza was really fresh at that moment. And it just was really difficult to picture this being a happy moment. You know what I mean? And so like the kind of Christmas stuff that I found most moving was stuff that came from like Palestinian artists.
Right, depicting Jesus amongst the rubble.
Yeah, and like that, if that's the Christmas we're talking about, I have a lot more understanding for it. The Children of Men kind of understanding of Christmas, I think, is more coherent to me because at this very moment I just don't get the chipper Christmas spirit thing at all. And maybe that's just that I'm chronic depressive. Maybe that's but I don't think it's not the state of the world right now. I mean we are continuing again a second holiday season in which the land in which Jesus was born is currently enduring a genocide.
Well, you know what I think it points to me like the idea of the Christmas like star of like the birth narrative of Jesus. The way that I say it is like the way it's almost referred to in the Bible itself is like a pinprick of light that most people wouldn't notice.
Yes,
it's like
yes.
It's small. It's so small scale. People often overstate, especially in bombastic renditions of the Christian story, that like the birth of Jesus is extremely humble. 20 people probably know about it and show up, including like the kings. They show up because they're looking for it, or they're literally pulled by supernatural forces to be there. But it's probably like 20 people max. Just a bunch of shepherds who are doing nothing. Like they were just like watching over their flocks in fields at night, and like kings who have to like take a while to show up there. It's just a pinprick of light. The appearance of like a couple supernatural beings, angels that say somebody special is going to be born into the world now, and maybe you should go see him. And the shepherds are like, well, that's freaky, but maybe we should. And the idea is just like, it is so small scale. That Christmas star, whatever it is just a pinprick of light in the distance that most people wouldn't notice. And only very small quantities of people follow it to its conclusion. And what they find is a poor baby in a shack. And they're like, this is amazing. They go like, this is amazing. Because it's like, that's not what I was expecting. But like, that's what's so beautiful about it is that they follow that pinprick of light to such a humble place. And it's just like, yeah, it's not bombastic. It's hope is on the way. It's a pinprick of light that will one day grow to bleed out the night sky, completely drive away all darkness. But we're not there yet.
Right. Yeah, I think that, and that message of anticipation, I think, is much stronger for me. Well, is there anything else we want to say here? I think we're moving toward wrapping up here, but
I think so too. And it's just like I have my heartfelt message for anybody experiencing sadness during the Christmas season is to not feel that compulsory feeling of happiness. It's okay. I mean, it would make priests everywhere extremely happy if you showed up and you even reached out to them and said, I'm here, but I'm not happy. And I feel like, maybe it's the eternal optimist within me. I feel like most clergy would love to just like to sit down and like talk to you and sort of understand where you're coming at and why this time of year does, sort of have that effect on your heart, because they know more intimately from anyone from theological training that and from experience that the holidays are not always this and any holiday is not always this feeling of compulsory happiness, that you have no obligation to be happy, but you do have a place you can go to be with others. And I think that's the point of the Holdovers, is that it's a bunch of really sad people experiencing vast misery that in a community, even a community as small as 3, can find things to sacrifice, can find ways of reaching across out to other people that transcend their misery. That is the only way any one of us can really do something fundamentally for another person, is to come together in community.
Yeah, like maybe for those who aren't as, likely to go to church or feel, have the religious conviction, at the very least, like, it's okay to feel sad around the holidays, but maybe find some other people to feel sad with. You know what I mean?
I think that's the way you have to do it, because feeling sad alone, it's so easy to feel sad alone, and it's probably something that we all go through at one period or another in our life. It's just that things pull people, the world pulls people apart. Distance, globalization, the way that we, modern society and modern culture has been formulated has pulled people apart in new and uncomfortable ways that we're just seeing the effects of now in the modern day. And because of that, I think people are more vulnerable to this feeling than ever. I think it can be very difficult. It can be very hard for people to navigate that. And coming together with other people, regardless of your tradition, regardless of, finding people who necessarily experience it the same way as you, finding a sense of community with others, whether that's secular, whether that's religious, takes you out of yourself. Just for a moment, just to say that, you know what, we're sad together, and that is powerful. I can't tell you how it's powerful, because that would require an intimate understanding of all people at all times, which no one has. But it works on people. My tradition would say that it is the Holy Spirit working through the hearts of all people to form senses of community and to love one another when love feels far from home and feels foreign. Just you can't get a sense of love or to be loved. And that's hard. That's one of the hardest things I think a person can go through, is that profound feeling of loneliness and the absence of love. But you can find that in the world if you just look for others who are suffering in the same way.
Awesome. Well, is there anything you want to plug or anything as we officially wrap it up here?
Pray up for me, because my plug is that please wish me well, that the coming months in my life will probably be the busiest things I've ever experienced, because the way that my sort of me going to seminary is going to break down is that I will be made a postulant very, very, very close to my seminary education. And it requires doing a lot of things all at once, going for my psych examinations, basically compressing a lot of things, because my bishop is a lovely woman who respects my time and really wants me to go to seminary this coming fall. But that means compressing a lot of different obligations into a very short period of time while I'm also working and going to school. So I just ask for, even if you're not a religious person, you don't have to pray for me. But I would just ask for well wishes and, prayers of the strength and success for the coming months and, for the experiences of others this holiday season.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining, Phil. This was a blast.
It was a blast. And you know what? It actually, despite the fact that we spoke about like very sort of somber topics, I actually don't feel very somber, which is very nice.
That's nice. Hell yeah. Hey, thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you like what you heard, make sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. It helps out the algorithm. And if you really like what you heard, consider supporting the show on Patreon. And one of the benefits of supporting this show on Patreon is that you get your name read out at the end of every episode. So, without further ado, today's episode is brought to you by Avakai Brodagam. I drink corn syrup yum. I'm once again Leo Zachary Dickinson, Philip Cozzi, Vita Breva, 2007, Christian Rock, Aaron Thompson, Attention Francis, Derek Hale, Gavin Aronson, Kyle Gannis, Metric Conversion, Mitchell McKinley, Moss, Nathan Thiessen, Racecar, Regular Sized Horse, parentheses, Small, Robert Eilman, Steven aka Spike Stonehand, The Worst of All Possible Worlds, Vicky Sutton, Geens, and of course, Chris Barker. Merry Christmas. Bye.
After Thanksgiving, our folks unpacked the manger scene with Mary, Joseph, shepherds, and 3 kings on bended knee, but left the manger empty till we slept on Christmas Eve. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy, comfort and joy. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy. And children dream of gifts beneath the tree, while I place in the manger baby Jesus figurine, sipping Christmas whiskey, wondering if I still believe. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy, comfort and joy. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy, comfort and joy. Oh, tidings